Chris Hughes here from Virginia Beach, Virginia. This week we have an update around the discussion of the cloud shared responsibility model. Past week and a half or so, we've seen a compromise with the Microsoft Azure Cloud environment. We've seen an incident disclosed by Microsoft and CISA that was attributed to a Chinese threat actor named Storm 0558. We've had a security researcher organization named Wiz come out showing that the incident may have been much bigger than initially anticipated, impacting potentially millions of applications and millions of users. For those who've worked with cloud security for some time, you've definitely been familiar with the cloud share responsibility model. Now, this typically is laid out across the three different kind of service models of infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service, with increasingly amounts of responsibility being attributed to the cloud service provider as you go on from infrastructure as a service up through SaaS. That said, there's been more and more folks in the industry calling for an update to this traditional shared responsibility model, in particular, cloud service provider Google, who have come out with the concept of shared fate. They've laid out some common problems, which is that customers simply lack a practical understanding of where their responsibility begins and ends. This means they often don't have a good understanding of the shared responsibility matrix or customer responsibility matrix between the consumer and the provider. There's also a presumption of CSP responsibility from the consumer. They make the assumption that the CSP is doing things that they simply aren't doing in many cases. And then also situations where CSPs have been limiting what actions cloud customers can take, despite the customer being responsible for some things. We've seen longstanding issues where default configurations, as we've seen the push from CISA and others now calling for secure by default, secure by design from software suppliers and technology suppliers and providers. For example, AWS 3 default configuration was public for these buckets. We saw millions of records exposed. Many organizations run into the security incident misconfiguration, as we typically have called it, but it's been a default configuration that was insecure and put customers in a compromised situation. Google has been pushing this shared fate approach, and then we've seen other organizations such as the Atlantic Council calling for this shift. It's also emphasized in things like the National Cybersecurity Strategy that was put out by the Office of the National Cyber Director. They're starting to point out that when we look across our ecosystem, our society, everything from our personal leisure activities to our critical infrastructure, national security systems, there's a lot of systemic risk when it comes to our dependence upon cloud, and cloud could have a cascading impact across the ecosystem. If there's a compromise in one cloud service provider or one cloud service, it can impact other organizations downstream, being a core part of the software supply chain. Many organizations are now starting to call for suppliers, cloud service providers in this case, to take more responsibility and revisit that traditional shared responsibility model and shift some of that burden in the hands of the major cloud service providers. That said, stay resilient out there.